and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Britt Smith. This episode, we're going to talk about how CBD-infused skincare products are helping people from cultures that traditionally don't trust cannabis to get more comfortable connecting with the health benefits on offer in the cannabis plant. Now, it's understandable that smoking flower and eating gummies might not be of interest to most first-time consumers. But something like a non-intoxicating lotion that soothes aches and pains and keeps us looking younger is probably more palatable. That's why high-end CBD skin and cosmetic products are proving to be a great way to gently introduce the health benefits of cannabis and hemp into a cautious consumer's life. And that is exactly what's happening in Japan, where marijuana is completely illegal. Just like in the US, the cannabis plant itself has long been vilified by the Japanese government, and marijuana smokers are heavily looked down upon. But at the same time, Japanese people have long included hemp in their health foods, and CBD products have been sold there since 2013, putting Japan on track to be one of the largest CBD economies in the world to date. So how do Japanese CBD brands connect the idea of a cannabis extract, like CBD, to a culture that overwhelmingly sees all things to do with cannabis as bad and even dangerous? According to today's guest, it's all about making it part of what they already know and love. This episode, we're talking to serial entrepreneur Mike Eidlin, CEO and founder of Walala CBD beauty brand based out of Tokyo. Walala was the first CBD skincare brand to be made and sold in Mike's home country of Japan. And as he explains, it hasn't been easy with all the tight Japanese regulations calling for 0% THC and a customer base that initially seemed wary of anything to do with cannabis. But over the past few years, Mike has built Walala into a leading luxury CBD skincare brand, and he's built meaningful, trusted relationships with his customers in Asia and beyond. We're going to talk about how Mike normalizes CBD and connects his Japanese consumers with the health benefits of hemp without bringing the stigmatized cannabis plant into the conversation. We'll also talk about what CBD in skincare can really do for us and our skin's health by increasing skin cell turnover and reducing inflammation. And we'll talk about where Mike sees the future of CBD beauty marketing going in Asia and around the rest of the world. We'll be right back to chat about CBD skincare in Japan with Mike Eidlin of Walala CBD. Mike, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's learn a bit about you to start off with. Where are you from? Where did you go to school? And what do you do now?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm currently in Tokyo. So I was born here, but my middle school years were in Berkeley. My high school years were in Oakland, California. And so I had a great time growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our family would visit Tokyo once a year. And so I feel like I also somewhat grew up in Tokyo as well. I'll spend a month in the summer or the winter. But I ended up going to school at UC Davis. I studied economics and Japanese. And my first job out of college was at Citibank, Tokyo, as a summer analyst on the trading floor. And I really experienced the kind of difficult nature of the Japanese salaryman life. Maybe hear stories every once in a while how people are overworked there. And I really did experience it. And I ended up telling myself, this is not a path I want to go down for the next 10, 20 years of my life. And so I moved back to California and decided to kind of start a startup. And that's sort of been my path so far.
It sounds like you got really inspired while you were in California.
Yeah, totally. But also, I grew up in a world where in high school, it wasn't crazy to have a successful friend's parent who might have been a lawyer or a business person or something like that, also enjoying cannabis peacefully, right, in their own home. And so with my parents, they said, look, maybe we prefer you don't do it that much, but if you're going to have some cannabis as a young high school kid who's exploring the world, right, do it at someone's house or do it at our house where it's safer, right? And so I was really fortunate to have parents who kind of understood that. But it's so interesting because then my mom would say, look, it's fine that you're in California right now, but if you ever bring that stuff back to Japan, you'll end your life. So
Oh,
don't ever bring it to Japan, right?
yeah.
And so that's kind of the background of what I'm doing, which is I grew up in a place in California where cannabis is so celebrated, right, and respected, versus in Japan where it's so evil and has the potential to put you in jail for 7 years, right?
Mm.
Subsequently make you an outcast societally afterwards.
So it sounds like anyone using cannabis or hemp in Japan would face a lot of stigma just in the culture. So the stoner stereotype is obviously not just in the US. Can you tell me where this view of cannabis comes from within the Japanese culture? Why is cannabis and hemp so frowned upon historically?
The history of Japan and cannabis is very interesting because Japan currently doesn't make a distinction between hemp and marijuana, but Japan has historically grown a lot of hemp, and it's this kind of gene where it's very, very tall and probably very low THC content. And
Right.
Japan used to have thousands and thousands of hemp farms, and they would use it for essentially industrial hemp for the fiber in the stems, or the seeds for food or oil or fuel, et cetera, et cetera. And right after World War II, the Cannabis Control Act was established. Essentially, when the United States beat Japan in the World War, General MacArthur essentially put in the Cannabis Control Act and made cannabis super illegal. And this is around the same time that in the US, cannabis was kind of becoming vilified and used as kind of a tool of like racism almost, right?
Right.
Against jazz musicians or whatnot. And so that has persisted since 1948, essentially.
So it's still fully illegal in Japan, but CBD is allowed. So what are the laws and the penalties in Japan surrounding cannabis?
To this day, essentially the rules are possession and cultivation of cannabis is illegal unless, and there's this very interesting exemption, unless you have the matured stalk or stems and seed of the plant.
Huh.
And so in this world where in Tokyo or Japan, where, there's so much precedence of people going to jail for a few years, having just a tiny gram in their pocket or
Yeah.
accidentally having it in their suitcase or whatnot. And, even like, I forget if it's in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s, but Paul McCartney of the Beatles, like, would bring in cannabis on his world
That's
tour
right. Yeah.
and get in a lot of trouble for that, right? And obviously he's a super international superstar, so there must have been a lot of strings pulled there. So currently in Japan, the matured stems and seeds of the cannabis plant are actually legal in the sense that they're used for the fibers, right? In for whether it's for kimonos or actually these large ropes in the temples in Japan. And there's a spice in Japan, a red spice called shichimi togarashi, and there's hemp seeds in it. And so
Mm.
Japanese people have been eating hemp seeds for many years, while essentially, and this might be a bit of an extreme word, but being brainwashed that cannabis is, highly illegal and highly dangerous by the Japanese government. So when it comes to today's kind of CBD market in Japan, basically the rules are your CBD product must come from the stems and the seeds of the cannabis plant, and they
Uh-huh.
must not contain any THC.
None at all.
None at all. So it can't be less than 0.3%, et cetera. And this
Mm.
is also a bit interesting because even with a very pure CBD isolate, there's going to be one molecule of THC in there, kind of from a
Sure.
scientific perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so it starts to become a problem of the law in theory will state absolute zero, but in practicality, that's actually not quite possible.
Yeah.
So it becomes a matter of how accurate are the machines that the Japanese regulators might have in detecting THC in your product.
Hmm.
And so there have actually been a few times where various products in the United States that have been imported into Japan end up having THC in them, and very, very small amount, but the Japanese government will kind of point that out, take pictures of that product and put it on their website.
That's strict.
Yeah, it's very strict. And
Yeah.
from my understanding, there haven't been any arrests made with various CBD products coming into Japan, but there have been seizures at customs, et cetera, that I've heard of. Most of Asia is like this as well.
I was going to say it's not like it's out of place and it's part of the world. There's only a few countries in Asia that have legalized cannabis, medical or recreational, but in most of Asia, it's not legal anywhere, even though there's been this really long medical history of
Yeah.
cannabis in that part of the world. I want to loop back quickly to what you were saying about the cultural side of it and how it's seen over there, how cannabis is seen over there. You mentioned that, the word outcast, if you're caught with
Yeah.
cannabis. Is that sort of the cultural view of people who consume cannabis, or is that the same with hemp and CBD? How do people see it out there?
Yeah. So I would say that there's definitely been a big shift happening in the past few years, first and foremost. And this is probably due to the era of the internet
Mm,
or something along the lines of culturally, Japan has been, it's an island, right? And while it is the third largest economy in the world, there are elements where it feels like a remote island, where the culture is so strong. The Japanese culture is so strong, both in a good, mostly in a good way, but
mm,
sometimes in a bad way, right? You have a lot of very polite people or whatnot, but good food, etc. And but that said, yeah, for the past 50, 60 years, the Japanese government has essentially put out information saying cannabis is as dangerous as methamphetamines or
yeah.
heroin or not once, never try it, not even once sort of thing, right?
Same as
And
the
so
US, really, and the UK.
yeah, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
And by now in the United States, the U.S. government is kind of maybe being less harsh on that kind of stance, even though
yeah.
cannabis still might be federally illegal in various pockets or whatnot. And so, yes, definitely, if you were caught with cannabis and went to jail for 7 years, your family, your friends, your coworkers would probably have a very different view of you. And it's very unfortunate, but they were kind of programmed to do so for the past seven
Mm-hmm.
years. We sort of have to break that programming. And when it comes to CBD, as of 2022, CBD has been actually mentioned in many beauty magazines, lifestyle magazines, influencers on Instagram and YouTube are posting about CBD products. And so there's definitely been a big shift there. And
Mm.
the Japanese government has kind of noticed this, right? And so they're planning on easing kind of regulations next year regarding CBD products, it seems like.
Just CBD?
Yes, it still seems like as of now, the Japanese government, they seem to be okay with CBD, but they seem to be very worried about the THC molecule. It must have something to do with psychotropic effects, right?
Sure.
And so CBD was legal in Hong Kong for a few years, but by the end of this year, it will become illegal. In South Korea, medicinal cannabis is allowed through hospitals, but there's no CBD market there. CBD itself is not allowed for supplements or cosmetics.
Mm.
Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, all those countries, CBD products are illegal. And only recently, Thailand has legalized cannabis. And so, yeah, if you think about it, Asia is a very large part of the world and
Yeah.
has billions of people and has a lot of economic impact. And out of that, in a weird way, Japan is sort of leading the CBD market there, right? It will probably still be like 10 years before Japan allows for THC products or just legalizes cannabis, to be quite honest. Probably somewhere
Mm.
between 5 to 10, if not more than 10. But for now, CBD seems to be allowed. And so, kind of my mission here and my question that I have to ask myself every day is how do we introduce CBD to a country where it's by association might be seen as kind of a suspicious or mysterious new trend in Japan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hate to break it to everybody, but hemp and cannabis are the same plant. Just, hemp has less THC than cannabis. But THC does have a lot of medical properties. But, one of the side effects of THC is that euphoric high, and understandably, that scares a few people. So, how do you present CBD products to a culture that may not trust cannabis and its extracts? And what do you tell Japanese people to help them not be so afraid of trying CBD?
Absolutely. So when I think about all the CBD products on the market in Japan right now, there are good ones out there and there are bad ones out there. And just like any new market that emerges, right? So what I kind of tell a lot of Japanese people these days is vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin CBD. And for better or for worse, when explaining it from like a B2B perspective to people in like the health foods or cosmetics industry, I explain to them as it's another very popular health food ingredient or cosmetic ingredient that's become very popular abroad, right? And so I actually, again, for better or for worse, sort of disassociate it with the cannabis plant in the first description that I make of it. And so for someone who's never heard of CBD in Japan, if I start off by saying it's an ingredient in the cannabis plant, they say, "Whoa, what are you doing, man?" Right?
Right.
And that's probably like their internal voice, right? What do you mean from cannabis plant? Like we're having a serious business conversation here, right? And so I try to make that analogy of like, no, look, it's like a vitamin, and when you ingest it orally, it might help you sleep a little bit better, or it helps you with relaxation or anxiety. And then again, I then tie it to something that they're already used to. And I say, look, it's like that health food GABA that's on the shelves in Japan, or it's like L-theanine, which is in matcha, right? And so I try to kind of normalize it to the average Japanese person there, right? And that's when I talk about it from an ingestible perspective, and that's for the whole health foods market in Japan. And then when it comes to a cosmetic ingredient, exactly to your point, which is I'm starting to realize this more and more, is that as CBD becomes more popular, a lot of people are surprised that you can put CBD into a cosmetic and or a cream or a beauty serum, etc. And on the contrary, kind of from a negative perspective, some people are probably starting to think, oh, CBD is becoming so popular, but people who put it in cosmetics, like why would you ever do that? Or they're probably just doing that because it's a fad, right? And so now I'm starting to realize, oh, I actually need to start educating people more on the benefits of CBD topically for the skin or even for the joints.
And like many people, I don't know that much about CBD and what it can actually do for our skin and our joints. I actually haven't used much topical CBD lotion. So what do the studies show, and what have you found when you've experimented with CBD creams?
What's really kind of exciting there is we actually did some research with a very large and leading Japanese cosmetics ingredient distributor. And they were very interested in our CBD ingredient, and they were doing the due diligence to see if they could actually distribute CBD as a cosmetic ingredient in Japan. And so they did what's called a DNA microarray test. And basically what that is they create a skin model, and you apply a bunch of cosmetic ingredients to it, and you can see how any given cosmetic ingredient will affect the DNA of our skin.
Whoa.
And
I want to know more about what a skin model is. It sounds kind of creepy, but necessary.
It probably along the lines of like a petri dish or something.
Right. Oh, that's less creepy than what I was thinking.
Yeah. And so we were actually able to see some data that how CBD is actually very anti-inflammatory and antioxidative, increases turnover in the skin.
Increases what in the skin?
Turnover. And so that's where your old skin cells, they go through apoptosis, which is they essentially die quicker, and then new skin cells emerge. And so it seems to be
CBD is good for that sort of regeneration of skin.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And one interesting personal observation, and my current girlfriend is, she's a very renowned skin and beauty doctor here in Japan. Over the summer, I got very tan. I went surfing a bunch, etc. And I would use my products, and I would notice my tan would go away quicker after I did so. And this could be a little bit, to be honest, another proper skin doctor who might be listening to this podcast might have some comments here, but her initial thought there, observation was, Oh yeah, Mike. Yeah, if you're using CBD products, the turnover of your skin is, accelerated, and so that must be the reason why your tan goes away quicker, right? And
That's
so perhaps the
crazy.
melanin must be rejuvenated or reaccelerated or something along those lines, right?
Huh.
And that was just kind of one personal observation I had. And my girlfriend's description there may or may not be 100% scientifically accurate.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Hmm.
But what I can also say is another kind of observation is I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is kind of my sport of choice these days. And, I'll kind of injure my fingers, or you can even see on my face right now, I have a little bit of a kind of a bruise on my face, but, it's a kind of a high contact sport. And I found our own products, like our CBD cream, to be very helpful when it comes to, if I'll stub my finger or something like that,
Mm.
the pain and the kind of the recovery of parts of my body that are my joints. And so one observation I've had is, if I'm in the weight room lifting weights and I have my kind of muscle pain from
Yeah.
lifting weights, putting a CBD cream there works less well than
Yeah.
if it's knee pain or ankle pain or elbow pain. It seems that CBD topicals work really well when it's your joints.
Hmm.
And when your joint is closer to the skin with less fat and muscle in between.
Yeah, yeah, that makes so much sense because you have, it's got to get through certain layers, and the higher the pain source is to the top layer, the quicker it's gonna absorb.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And so if you have tennis elbow or like neck pain
yeah,
or finger or wrist pain, it seems to work a lot better than if you have maybe generalized back pain, where
yeah.
there's more muscles and fat that has to, the CBD has to penetrate. And so I'm definitely learning a lot from like a observational kind of perspective, right? And
Hmm.
we've even had people say, "Oh, it's helped so much with their skin problems, whether it's their daughter's eczema or something like that, right?" And personally, even for myself, my face will get a bit red after kind of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where maybe someone's
Yeah,
like
slapped you
elbows
around
kind
a
of,
little bit.
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
And so even this morning before coming here, I used our toner, right, our CBD toner. And so yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of CBD as a cosmetic ingredient,
Mm.
and especially as we hope to do more research on the efficacy there, and also realizing how big Japan's beauty market is. The United States has the largest beauty market in the world. Second is China, then third is Japan.
Wow.
All right, you hear so much about Korean beauty or K beauty in the United States or maybe in the EU, etc. Right? It's become very popular and for good reason. But Japan has the third largest beauty market.
And you want a slice of that pie, right? And as you said, the world of cosmetics is huge, and Japan is home to about 3,000 beauty care companies already. But your product line is different in that it has a cannabis extract, CBD. So, when you're moving back to Japan to introduce CBD to the population, how did you land on skincare?
When we think about how to promote cannabis or legalization of cannabis or responsible use of cannabis in Japan, I think it has to be step by step. And I think a very good first step is as a beauty ingredient. And this is exactly my thought. Wanted to kind of move to Japan to start this startup or company here, which is if I'm going to introduce CBD to the Japanese population, who should I target first?
Yeah,
They say for entrepreneurs, create a product that solves your own problem. And
right.
that's an easy way to know that you're onto something. But I thought to myself, as like when I first moved here, I was 27 or so. As a 27-year-old male, what sort of product would I want personally? And the answer, for better or for worse, is a THC product. And so, I thought to myself, okay, maybe that's not the best advice there because that'll be illegal in Japan. But also, I was really, before I moved to Tokyo, I loved the brand Can. Do you know that
Oh
brand?
yeah, yeah. I know that.
Yeah.
Well, we love that brand. That's a really great drink brand out of California.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought they were such geniuses in the way they dose their product because I've had many edibles in my life. Even I
Hmm.
used to even make edibles in high school, brownies and stuff. And there's so many instances, well, where I'll mess up, right? And I'll just have a little
Sure.
bit too much. And even while cooking, I'll lick the batter, and by the time the brownie's done, I can barely take it out of the oven. And, but
Yes.
again, did such a great job where you drink one, right? You'll drink one, and you may or may not even feel that. And it's kind of like a beer, right? Where
Yeah,
you
right.
drink one and you feel kind of good. You drink four, you're definitely feeling you're tipsy, and you drink six, eight beers, and you're drunk, right? And
Yes,
so
yeah.
basically that was really inspirational to me because it made me realize there's probably a bigger market, maybe even in the US as well, to introduce cannabis to people who've never tried it before versus creating products for the veterans of the like stoners or whatnot, right?
Yeah, yeah. You want to talk to the kind of curious people.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so that was also part of the inspiration. And so my conclusion there was I'm moving to Japan to start a CBD business. I got to create a brand. What should I do? Is it going to be vapes? Is it going to be drinks, gummies, tinctures,
Mm-hmm.
etc.? And I thought to myself, okay, we got to raise money from venture capitalists. We got to raise money from angel investors. And so my conclusion was I need to create a product where my mom would appreciate,
Yeah.
and if she can appreciate the benefits of CBD, then anyone else can, right? And so then my conclusion became, okay, we need to create CBD skincare products, and they need to be high quality. And they can't smell like cannabis. They need
Yeah.
to smell like a regular skincare product. And we can't price them too cheap because even though, maybe we want to get a lot of quote market share, right? Kind of like thinking like a business person. But we also need to be kind of well respected and trusted. And
Yeah.
so I did a bunch of market research. I looked at products all the way ranging from $300 creams like La Mer or more, $10, $20 creams, or somewhere in the middle, like Kiehl's or Aesop, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we essentially landed on let's create high quality luxury CBD skincare products. And if we start from there, in the future, if we decide to create any sort of other brand, which we actually have started to do so, whether it's a drink brand or a pet brand or a brand for athletes, at least we'll have been known as the company that created those high quality luxury skincare products. And we're sort of going down the pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to go up, right? Imagine being a vaporizer brand or a tincture brand that all of a sudden tries to get into skincare, right?
That's a very good point. You make your mark early. It's in a product that is in a non-threatening way. It's an accessible product. And that's such a smart way to think about branding when you're entering almost a whole new market. And you have to really take into account the existing culture, what they already think of CBD and cannabis, and trying to make it just not so scary to them that they try something. The way you think about it is so smart. What would my mom allow herself to take? Because it sure isn't a hit
Yeah.
of a joint, but she'll put some nice face cream on, right? That's very smart.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think is going to be changing in Japan? We're hearing some sort of rumblings that they're considering cannabis as a medical industry. Obviously, CBD has been really taking off over there. What do you think is in the future?
Yeah, so the Japanese CBD market has been growing for sure, right? And we also have a B2B business where we will sell our ingredient that we import into Japan, or we'll partner up with Japanese factories to help with white labeling or OEM product development. And so we've actually spoken with a lot of very, very large companies in Japan, and a few we're actively helping them create products, but the majority are still hung up on the current regulations and the current grayness of the CBD market. And the grayness actually comes from two parts. And I didn't mention this in the earlier part, but THC is definitely a issue when it comes to product development in Japan,
Mm.
as you can't have any. And CBD naturally kind of oxidizes into THC, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, and or if it's exposed to slight or harsh acidic environments and or heat, right? And so Japanese companies, especially if they're a large company, have to be very careful when they create a CBD product where after you create the product, it doesn't end up turning into THC on the shelves.
Right.
And it's not going to completely turn into a product where like you'll feel the THC, and it's a very, very small amount, right? Like, tens of ppms, parts per million or whatnot. But the other issue currently facing Japan is the Japanese government allows for CBD that comes from the stems and the seeds of the cannabis plant, right? Which I explained later. But people who know that CBD doesn't really exist in the stems and the seeds of the cannabis plant.
Yeah, that's not
Right?
where it's definitely the strongest. Those are the buds and the leaves, but those aren't,
Exactly.
you're not allowed to extract from those parts of the plant.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so there's actually what's called the stems and seeds issue in Japan right now. And when doing my due diligence or kind of preparation to do this startup and move to Japan, I contacted many hemp farms in the United States. And I said, hey, my name is Mike. I'm going to export your product or your ingredient to Japan. It just can't contain THC, and it has to come from the stems and the seeds of the plant. And 10 out of 10 of those hemp farmers or kind of production companies, they're like, what do you mean it has to come from the stems and the seeds? There's no CBD in the stems and the seeds. And even if there was, like, we would need so many stems that it's not possible. And I said, no. But the Japanese government says it's okay if it comes from the stems and seeds. And he said, I don't know what the Japanese government's thinking, et cetera, right? And so there's a little bit of an issue going on in Japan where, and I think it's actually important we bring this up briefly, because
Yeah.
in order to kind of have a healthy, CBD market or cannabis market, people need to follow the rules. But what's really weird is it's very conflicting because the rule makers, aka the regulators, the Japanese government, are also sort of kind of closing their eyes on this issue, right? And they know that CBD doesn't really exist in the stems and the seeds. Whenever you import a CBD isolate, it comes in the form of a powder or a final product. It will look like a gummy, right? There's no kind of real test that you can do to say, hey, does this product come from the stems and the seeds?
They got to take your word for it.
Yes, exactly. And the Japanese government will put out paper or the requirements. They put out the requirements and they say you need to create a written affidavit that says this product is certifiably from the stems and the seeds, and you need to take pictures of the stems and the seeds. And that's how they confirm, right?
Okay, all right.
And so in that way, I would say a huge portion of the Japanese CBD market is a bit gray in that sense.
Wow, that's very vague and strange. Does that mean that you get to, when you're infusing the CBD into your products, does that product come from stems and seeds in Japan, or do you import? That's a real problem.
It is a bit of a problem, and it's a problem for large companies who don't want to take on that risk. It's actually a great problem for smaller enterprising startups or small businesses that are willing to take on that risk, because then they get to enter the market quicker. So if anything, it's kind of an interesting kind of dynamic that's going on. But we as a startup, upon learning the Japanese rules and the reality of kind of CBD extraction or botany of the cannabis plant, right? Cannabis L sativa, the fact that cannabinoids are created in the trichomes of the plant, which can be considered to be the resin of the plant, which is mostly concentrated in the flower and the leaves and not necessarily the stems. I was so confused, and I consulted with my mentor and I said, Hiro-san, like, his name is Hiro, and okay, I've gotten this far. I figured out what the regulations in Japan. I talked to farmers. I'm in the process of incorporating our company, and I'm already doing the branding, etc. But it seems like I have to do this weird thing with the paperwork, talking about the stems and seeds. He said, Mike, Japan is one of the safest countries in the world. It's one of the most peaceful countries in the world, has the best food. But there are two laws that you never want to break in Japan. And one of them is tax evasion, and the other is anything to do with cannabis. And he said, the Japanese police force and the regulators, you don't want to mess with them. Just don't do anything gray when it comes to cannabis.
Yeah.
And so I took those words to heart. And whereas other companies, they might be doing the whole stems and seeds thing, I was about to give up on the business. And I said, okay, this must be a few years too early. I'll revisit it once it's properly legal. But I thought to myself, but wait, CBD is just a molecule. It's an ingredient. I wonder if there's CBD in other plants, maybe. And I started doing some research, and I found a few companies saying, "Oh, we have CBD from orange peels or CBD from hops." Right? Because hops are
What?
very similar to cannabis, actually, kind of
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
taxonomy perspective. And I did my research, and it turns out that the kind of the whole orange peel thing is kind of true in the sense that terpenes exist in orange peels, and you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
actually synthesize CBD using one of those ingredients and another ingredient. But the key word there is synthesize.
Right.
And something that I found, a company out of Europe, was that they actually have a natural based CBD product, but they also have a synthesized CBD product. Growing up in California, I thought, oh, synthesized CBD. That sounds so weird.
Right.
CBD is supposed to be natural. It's supposed to come from the cannabis plant. And so at that point, I thought to myself, this could be the solution, or this could be something really weird, like synthesized weed or whatever. All those problems you hear about, like with those designer cannabinoids or whatnot. I was living in LA at the time, and I went to this guy, Dr. Jeff Chen of the UCLA Cannabis Research Association. I said, "Hey, my name's Mike. I want to create this startup in Japan. They had this weird stems and seeds issue. I found synthesized CBD. Is this stuff legit? What is synthesized CBD?" And he was really, really kind and responded to me. And we met up for coffee and said, "Mike, did you take a multivitamin this morning?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I did. How did you know?" He said, "Yeah, the vitamin C in your multivitamin is synthesized.
Right, of
But
course.
vitamin C exists in oranges, lemons, vegetables, right?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, Mike, have you ever drinking a Red Bull, or have you ever drinking coffee?" I said, "Yeah, of course." He says, "Well, that caffeine in the coffee that you drink, sure, is extracted from the coffee bean, but the caffeine in Red Bull is synthesized."
Yeah.
Right? And so that was like a light bulb moment for me, especially in Japan, a place where cannabis is so scary. That's why I said vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin CBD.
Mm.
If we have to educate 130 million people, which is the population of Japan, or was it 180? Sorry, I forgot. But it's somewhere between 130 and 180 million people in Japan, the benefits of CBD. And I have to start off by saying it has something to do with the cannabis plant. They might find it to be a very, a little suspicious. But if I say, "Oh yeah, it's like a vitamin, right?" And
Mm-hmm.
it actually, the ingredient we use doesn't actually come from cannabis.
Mm.
It's synthesized in a pharmaceutical company, but it's actually the same ingredient as something that would come from the cannabis plant. Then people's perspective might be a little bit different. And so we as a company, we actually use synthesized CBD when creating our products. The more I learned about the health foods market or the cosmetics market in Japan and globally, the more I realized that the magnesium that you take or the GABA, etc., it's synthesized.
Oh,
and
of course it is. I didn't even think about it, but of course it is.
and no one thinks about it, right?
Yeah.
Of course it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And
Yeah.
your favorite supplement company isn't squeezing orange juice into supplements and creating
They're
those
not.
vitamin
What
C
do
supplements. What do you mean, right?
you... Right.
It tastes like oranges though, right? And so, yeah, I think what we're doing is kind of unique on a global sense, where luckily in the US, hemp and cannabis is mostly legal, and so you don't have to necessarily use synthesized ingredients.
Yeah.
But in Japan, where it's not, we're actually able to provide 100% legal way for B2B clients or our consumers, 100% legal CBD product and ingredient. Yeah, it's crazy. But if you think about the global cosmetic market, the global beauty market, the global supplements market, all those companies, those large, multinational companies, they're totally used to synthesized ingredients, right? And if anything, they might even prefer them because sometimes synthesized ingredients tend to be more stable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we're doing is it's interesting because it allows us to kind of introduce cannabinoids and CBD to a larger kind of market and potentially introduce them to larger companies.
So synthesis really is allowing CBD skincare to exist without the cannabis plant being involved at all. And it's like that slow immersion into the world of cannabinoids, which are the chemical compounds produced by the cannabis plant, just without the stigma attached to it from this actually coming from the devil's lettuce itself, right?
Yeah, they're not using hemp extracted or cannabis extracted CBD product, but hey, at least they're creating a CBD product, right? And
Yeah.
so some of these very, very large companies that we're talking with in Japan, they create kind of patches, or they'll create cosmetics or supplements, etc., that any Japanese person would know about. And so if one of those companies creates CBD products, then I think instantly it legitimizes CBD in the eyes of the Japanese consumer who's been so scared about cannabis for a long time. And again, this is, in my mind, it's a step-by-step process, right? So we get those Japanese consumers to embrace CBD as a cosmetic, as a health food, and then they get used to it. And then 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, the Japanese government starts mulling over legalizing hemp production domestically for CBD products. And then essentially they'll say, maybe 0.3% THC is okay. Right?
We'll get
and then
there. Slow drip, right?
Exactly. And then maybe they'll say 1.0% THC is okay. And then maybe they'll say actually 5% is okay, 10% is okay. And then before you know it, Can is importing their products into Japan. Or is that right?
Very much looking forward to watching the growth of Japan's market and seeing how things change over there. I think it's incredibly interesting as a litmus test for what goes on in the rest of Asia and how things are being accepted in different cultures and how brands need to be cognizant of what cannabis and CBD means in different countries and to different populations. Mike, this has been such a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from you. At the moment, Walala is not available in the US. Is that correct? We're not able to get it here yet?
Correct. So we were just at the Luxury Meets Cannabis conference in New York a few weeks ago. I had a great time there. And we were really able to kind of confirm and validate our suspicions that our product might do well in the US. A lot of people who tried our products at the show, they like, wow, the quality is very good. It's not something I've seen before in a CBD topical product, right? And there's no smell of cannabis. I personally don't mind, but
I prefer not to smell of cannabis, I think.
Okay. So when you use your beauty serum or your toner, maybe sometimes it's better that doesn't smell like cannabis, etc. And so we're planning on releasing our product early next year, or our brand in the US.
Nice.
And the tagline is, made in Japan, luxury CBD skincare. And those words don't really go together usually, right? And so I'm really excited to take the research and product development that we've done in Japan and kind of launch that in the US. And, I keep up on the US market, and I've seen maybe CBD in beauty. There was a peak a few years ago, and it's sort of resided as a result. But hopefully we can help kind of bring that back again. And even in the US, there's a lot of understanding that CBD exists, but maybe there's a good amount of people who are a little bit skeptical about it. But those people may have not tried CBD as a beauty product, right? And there's probably still a huge market out there for the average soccer mom or metropolitan businesswoman or something like that to really embrace CBD beauty as well. And so I'm very excited for the next upcoming few years.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to watch and see how you grow along with Japan. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Mike.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much.
Thanks to our guest this week, Mike Eidlin of Walala CBD Beauty brand. And as a personal side note, I think Walala's products are not only beautiful, but they feel and smell great. I highly recommend. Next week's episode is for my fellow pet parents, where my 2 dogs will be the stars of the show, and we'll be talking to Angela Ardolino about CBD for our fur babies.
What I use it the most for is cancer, seizures, geriatric old age, not having to turn to convention. I just had an incredible case with my Doberman who was diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a very aggressive, very painful cancer, and I treated her completely holistically. She never got radiation or chemotherapy, so she broke all kinds of records, and it was amazing. And then I needed to learn how the heck it did it.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss that one. And follow us on social media at Different Leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Be sure to check out differentleaf.com for all the issues of our gorgeous magazine. The winter issue is all about medical marijuana, and the magazine is available at differentleaf.com and on thousands of shelves across the US and Canada. You can find us at select Barnes & Noble bookstores, CVS pharmacies, Walmarts, and cannabis dispensaries. Find your local in-person retailer at differentleaf.com.